Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today on maternity and paternity pay in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'll be presenting the webinar today and I am joined by my colleague Johnny, who's standing by behind the scenes, ready and waiting to answer your questions. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover in the session today. So I'm going to begin with a brief introduction to statutory parental payments, running through some of the current rates for the 22 to 23 tax year. We're then going to give you a demo on recording maternity or paternity details. And I'm going to show you the quick screens where everything can be entered in one place and you can run a handy report. We're then going to process the statutory payment and we're going to look at adjusting other payments, either using the Make Up Basic feature or by doing manual adjustments. And we'll finish that demo with reclaiming the statutory payment, which is something you will do at the end of your tax month or tax quarter. And then we have a final section on troubleshooting where I'm going to run through some of the more common queries and how to troubleshoot and resolve those queries should it happen to you. And we'll have time at the very end to stick around and to pick up any of those final questions. So let's get straight on with the introduction. And the two statutory parental payments that we'll be focusing on in today's webinar are the ones there at the bold at the top of this slide. So statutory maternity pay or SMP and statutory paternity pay or SPP. Other statutory payments include adoption pay, shared parental pay, paternity pay if you're adopting a child, and parental bereavement pay. So we'll touch on some of those, but we will be focusing on the main ones, maternity and paternity. Now, in terms of SMP, this is payable for up to 39 weeks of a maternity pay period. The first 6 weeks is paid at the higher rate. So that's 90% of the employee's average weekly earnings. We'll explain how that's calculated a little later on in the demo. And then 33 weeks at the standard rate, which for the current tax year is £156.66 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings if that happens to be lower. So it's the exact same for adoption pay, 6 weeks at higher rate, followed by 33 weeks at standard rate. Now in terms of paternity pay, for this payment, they would get up to 2 weeks at the standard rate. So that's the lower of £156.66 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings. But they do have the option of sharing any remaining maternity or adoption pay as shared parental pay. If you are interested in learning more about shared parental pay, we do have a recording of a webinar we've run in the past, which explains all about that. So I'm just going to show you some of the key dates involved in calculations of these statutory payments. And we're focusing on SMP in this example. So I'm going to start on the right-hand side of this slide where we have the baby's due date, also known as the expected week of confinement or EWC. And this is the date that will be provided by the mother on the MAP B1 certificate. And then if you count back 15 weeks from the due date, that takes you to the qualifying week. And this is the point up to which the average weekly earnings are calculated. So there's an 8-week period up to the qualifying week where a weekly average is taken, and it's 90% of that weekly average, which will be the higher rate of SMP. Now, to qualify for the payment, they must have been employed by you at least 26 weeks before the qualifying week. So adding them two together, it's 41 weeks before the due date. And another couple of key dates at the bottom of the slide there is the earliest leave date for SMP, which is 11 weeks before the due date, unless the baby arrives before that point, at which case it will start immediately. And 4 weeks before the due date is where an employee who is off sick with a pregnancy-related illness would need a transfer to SMP from statutory sick pay. So qualifying week, I guess, is the key date in this scenario, and you'll see how the software calculates all of that for you when we come to do the demos. So let's now move on and talk about recording maternity or paternity details. And there's a few bits of information you will need. So essentially, it's the dates of leave. So you'll need to know the date that the employee wants to start their maternity or paternity. And then you'll need some kind of evidence. So if it's for maternity pay, it's the medical evidence, the MAP B1 certificate, which they'll get from the midwife or doctor. For paternity, it's a self-declaration, which will include the baby's due date. It's form SC3. If you were to search for that on the gov.uk website, it'll give you that form. And in the case of SPP, you also need to know the date the baby was born, because that is the earliest point at which the SPP can begin. So what do you do once you've got this information? Well, you'll need to enter it into the software. So this is what I'm going to show you in the demo. So let me just bring the slides down, and you'll see I'm already signed into my Sage 50 payroll. I'm going to be working with monthly paid employees for the demos today. And the first thing I'll do, and I would recommend you do this as well when you're setting up these payments, is to set your process date to your next pay date. So in my case, my employees are paid on the last day of the calendar month. So I'm going to set my date to the 30th of November. And the reason I do this at this point is because statutory payments will be calculated up to the process date. So if you've got it set to an earlier date, it's not actually going to give you the amount that will actually be paid come the pay date when you process your payroll. So let's start with some maternity details. And if you've set this up before, you may have gone directly into the employee record and onto the absence tab in order to enter this information. But I do want to show you an alternative way, which does have a couple of advantages. So I will start by selecting the employee who's going on maternity leave. And then from the payroll links section, which is this part in the middle of the screen, you'll see there is a link for recording maternity. Now, if you've got a smaller screen than I have and you can't see these links, you can either sort of resize it to bring them in view like so, or you can always head to the employee tasks, where you will also find the recording maternity link. So when I go into this, it'll come up with the quick SMP screen, and this is where we're going to enter the required information. So first of all, I'll select the box to confirm I've received the medical evidence, and then from that evidence, I'm going to enter the expected date of birth, which in this example is going to be the 26th of November. I can then click the button to check the entitlement, and Sage Payroll will run some checks for you. And what we're hoping to see is 3 green ticks here on the right-hand side of the screen, confirming that we've got the evidence, the employee has worked for long enough, so at least 26 weeks up to the qualifying week, and that their average earnings are high enough. So average earnings do need to be above the current lower earnings limit for national insurance. So it also displays the employee's average earnings, and this is what the higher rate of SMP will be based upon, and it starts to display some of the key dates, with this one here, start of the 15th week before the baby's due, being the qualifying week. Now, the only other information you need to provide at this point is the employee's last day of work, and SMP payments will be calculated from the very next day. So if the employee's taken some annual leave before they officially start maternity leave, you would treat their last day of annual leave as being the last day of work. And in this case, the employee is actually working up to Friday the 11th. That'll be their last day of work, and they're going to begin their maternity leave the very next day. So I've put the 11th of November in. I've clicked into the next box. Now, actually, at this point, I don't know the actual date of birth. Maybe baby hasn't been born yet. And we're waiting for the employee to confirm when they're going to return exactly. So I've also left that blank. But we do now have enough information to calculate the SMP entitlement. So they are getting this 6 weeks at the higher rate. So that is 90% of their average earnings, this figure here, and 33 weeks at the standard rate for this tax year, 156.66. Now, it might be useful for you to get a report showing these key dates and the statutory pay entitlement, and you can get that by using the print option here at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to print out this report for your own records. And if you're happy with the information shown, it's just a case of clicking save and then close. And that is your maternity details entered. And if you were to go directly into the employee record now, you could see the same information if you go to absence and then SMP. So we've got our due date, last day of work, average earnings are calculated, and we've got our medical evidence received. And this is also where you can get a view of the entitlement and also the entitlement currently due. So start of maternity pay period, 12th of November. And from that date up to our pay date, 30th of November in this case, we have 2.71 weeks, which is all being paid at this point at the higher rate. So we've got everything set up, and you've seen that that has automatically appeared within the employee record. I'll just show you something similar for paternity as well. So I'll just pick employee 2 for the paternity details. And again, I can use the recording paternity option from the employee tasks or from the payroll links. And then we enter similar information. So we confirm that we've received the declaration, the SC3 form in this case. We record the baby's due date. So this baby was due on the 12th of November. We can check the entitlement, make sure we've got our 3 green ticks. And then with paternity leave being a lot shorter, either 1 or 2 full weeks, we can actually run through and fill in the rest of the dates. Now, SPP payments can only start once the baby has been born. So if the employee is taking some annual leave before the baby's born, that's fine. But the last day of work will need to be no earlier than the day before the actual date of birth. So let's assume in this case, the baby arrived exactly when he was due. So employee actually worked up to Friday the 11th. Baby was born on the 12th, which will be the official start date of the SPP, the day after the last day at work. And this employee is taking 2 weeks. So from the 12th, we'll count forward 2 weeks. So they would be due back at work kind of any date from the 26th onwards. So we've filled in the full set of dates for paternity. We can see things like the qualifying week, average earnings, we can print this information. And then the entitlement to SPP in this case is 2 weeks at the standard rate 156.66. So again, I'm going to save these details. And if you were doing it the alternative way, you might have gone directly into the record, onto the absence tab, and click SPP. But you can see the information I've just entered all now appears in this section as well. As we did before, we can view the entitlement, start of paternity pay period, and what is currently due, which in this case is both of those full weeks. So that is the absence recorded and effectively the statutory payment set up. But let's give you a quick reminder of that process before we move on to looking at the enter payment screen. So with maternity, you'll get the MAP-B1 certificate provided by a midwife or doctor. That's got the due date on it. So tick the box, enter the due date, enter the employee's last day of work. You don't need to fill in any other information at this point. And then if you want to, you can print the main detail from this page using the print option. And for paternity, it's the employee declaration. And if you've downloaded the handout, you can click on these links if you want to find that form online. And again, similar to maternity, tick the box to say you've received the declaration, enter all of the dates associated with the paternity leave, and then you'll be able to view the entitlement and print those details as well. So what we're going to take a look at next is how this fits into your payroll process. So we're going to take a look at the enter payments screen. So let's just come out of the slides once again. I'm just going to select the 2 employees that we've entered the absence details for. And as you saw earlier in the demo, we've already set our process date. So if I go into the enter payment screen, as if I'm running my payroll, you can see the salary that we paid them last time. So we will need to make some adjustments to that, which I will come on to in a few minutes. But to actually view the statutory payment, you would go onto the summary tab. And you'll see that any statutory payment has its own line here on the left-hand side, and we can see the current amount of statutory maternity pay due. So this is the total amount due. And if you want to get a breakdown of this figure, here's a handy tip. You can select it, click the drop-down arrow, which will take you back into the statutory maternity pay information. And if you click onto entitlement, that figure equates to 2.71 weeks. And those 2.71 weeks at this stage is at the higher rate. Now moving on to the other employee. Employee 2, again, we've just got his usual salary entered for now. And I will come back and make an adjustment, but this is the paternity pay payable. Now it is calculated up to the process date or the pay date. So if this paternity pay started later on in the month, maybe it started on the 24th, they would only get what was due up to the pay date in this month's pay run, and then they'll get the rest of it when I do next month's pay. But actually the way the dates have fallen this time, if I select it and click the drop down arrow, I can view the full SPP details and the entitlement, and we can see that both of those weeks are due now, and that's all being paid at the standard rate. So that was the enter payment screen. A quick reminder of how you drill down to view the current entitlement. But let's now talk about adjusting the employee's other pay. So whilst they're on maternity or paternity leave, they may have done some work in that period that they need to be paid for, or you might have a company policy, a company maternity or paternity scheme, which pays above and beyond the statutory payment amount. So if you're not sure what your policy is on maternity and paternity leave, you should check obviously with your employee's contract or any other documents that you might have. But when it comes to adjusting the employee's payments, there are kind of two ways you can do this. So there is an automatic option where you can make up to either the usual basic pay or to a specific amount of pay that you have entered on the payments tab. So there's a make up basic option that you can find in the summary tab, and that will do an automatic adjustment to the hours or number value for a selected payment so that the employee ends up being paid what they usually are paid. Or there's the manual way. So you would need to work out how much you need to pay the employee for the days or hours they have worked this period. And if there's no company scheme to pay them over and above the statutory payment amount, you would just reduce the salary accordingly, and the statutory payment will calculate automatically. So I'll show you both of those options in practice. If we jump back to the demo, again, I'm sticking with the two employees that I've set up for these payments. And if I go back into the enter payment screen, you'll remember we've already had a check on the statutory payment amount. And for employee 1, we do, in this example, want to give her her full monthly salary, the full £2,000. But you'll see currently her gross pay is just over £3,000 because at the moment she's being paid the maternity pay that is due, as well as the full salary. So this is where Make Up Basic comes into play. You enter the full amount you want them to get. In this case, £2,000. You would then click on Make Up Basic. It'll then confirm that you've selected to do this and that the hours or number value of a payment will need to be reduced. So if they have more than one payment assigned, do check which payment it's trying to adjust, because if it's not the one that you want to adjust, you can always click no and it will come up with a different payment. But in this case, it is the salary that needs to be reduced. So I'm going to click onto yes, and you can see that the pre-tax pay has gone down, maternity pay is still in place, and in this case, the employee is now getting their full £2,000 salary. And that is now made up of statutory pay and then topped up to the full pay with the amount of salary. And you can repeat that process in any period where there's a specific amount you want to pay. And then if it goes to SMP only further down the line, you can start reducing that salary down to 0. So we'll take a look at the other employee. I'll just click Save Next. It'll move us on to employee 2. So let's imagine for this employee, we don't have a company paternity scheme, so they don't qualify for any company pay for that 2 weeks that they're taken off. They will still get the statutory payment. And at the moment, we've got the full salary and we've got the statutory paternity pay. Now, in order to adjust the salary to reflect just what they've worked this month, we will need to do a manual calculation. And to do this, just have a think about how you would work out a part period salary for someone that's starting or leaving, because you would most likely apply the same principle in this case. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to count up the number of working days in November, which is 22. And I'm just going to pay them for 12 of those days, because 10 of those working days he has been on paternity leave. So I'll do an adjustment to the hours or number by entering 12 divided by 22. And then this amount of pay is representing the 12 working days that they worked. And then in addition to that, they're getting that £313.32 paternity pay. Now, I will quickly mention pension contributions. So depending on the pension scheme rules, you may be required to maintain your employer pension contribution at the same level that it was when they are paid their usual salary. So if you need to make an adjustment to either of the pension contributions, it's usually the employer contributions that needs to stay at the original amount. What you can do is you can jump into the employee record. You can go onto your pensions tab, and if you manage the pension scheme, you can temporarily set your employer contributions to be a fixed amount. So maybe look back at the previous periods to see what the employer usually contributes, and then that can be typed in as a fixed amount for the duration of the parental leave. If you need to maintain that existing employer contribution, then you can always put it back to the percentage once the parental leave is finished. So if you need to, that is one way you can adjust your employer pension contribution, or employee for that matter. So we've done a couple of adjustments, one makeup basic and one manual. What I will do is just to show you some of the pre-update reports, just so you can see how that appears on the reports. So if I go into my pre-update report screen, we'll take a look at some payslips first. So just zooming in, get a closer look. So this was the salary that was automatically adjusted using Makeup Basic. So the amount has gone down to the difference between the original salary rate and the parental pay. So just a generic label of parental pay. And for the other employee, we did the adjustment to this. So you could adjust the hours or number. You might adjust the rate instead. So however you've worked out the employee's salary, you type that in manually. And again, the parental pay is being shown as a separate line on the payslip. Also appears on Payment Summary Part 1, which I'm sure many of you run. So parental payments have their own column. So you can see in this case, we've got our parental payments listed just here. So we're now at the stage where we've set up the parental pay. We've made the adjustments to the wages, but I'm not going to complete the pay run just yet, because I do want to talk about reclaiming statutory pay. So I might have mentioned at the start of the webinar that with these parental payments, every employer can reclaim at least some of the payment that has been paid out. There's two levels of reclaim. So most employers would reclaim 92% of the statutory pay paid out. But if you qualify for small employers relief, you can actually claim back a total of 103% of the statutory pay. So 100% of statutory pay and 3% known as NI compensation. Now, you would usually qualify for small employers relief if your total national insurance contributions, that's employee and employer, are £45,000 or less in the tax year prior to the qualifying or matching week. So if that applies to you, There is a setting that you'll need to select before you update any statutory payment to ensure that the amount reclaimed is the higher amount for that small employer's relief. So just going to show you a way that you can check the previous year's national insurance. We actually recommend this as part of starting the new tax year, just having a quick check on what your total national insurance was and then selecting this setting if it applies to you. But if I just jump back to the demo, I'm just going to show you how to run a P32 for a previous tax year. So I can change my process date to the last day of the previous tax year, which is the 5th of April, 2022. And then if I go into my main reports, into period end, got P32, employer payment record. And because the process date is in the previous year, it's actually going to show the values for that previous year. And I'm actually going to run it for the full year, tax month 1 to 12. So the number that we're looking at is the one in box 4, the gross national insurance. That's the employee plus employer contribution for the full tax year. And in my case, it is less than that £45,000 threshold. So I do indeed qualify for small employers relief. So once you've established that, I'm just going to set my date back to the current pay date. And then I can go into company and then settings. And we're looking for the checkbox on the right-hand side, eligible for small employers relief for 2022 to 23. So it just seems to be taking a few seconds to open, but there it is. And you'll see I've already ticked it. So I probably ran this same check at the start of the tax year, and I knew that I would still be eligible. Right, so now that we've done that check on small employers relief, we can actually complete the payroll, and then I'll show you how the reclaim works. So I'm going to select everyone in my payroll to update the records. Let's assume we've done all of our pre-update reports. So I'd run through the update records wizard, taking my usual backup when prompted. And once you get the confirmation that the employees have been updated, you would send your FPS in the usual way. Now this FPS will only report details of the employee's taxable pay, the PAYE tax, national insurance, and student loan deductions. So you'll see, as part of this liability total, there's nothing about recovering statutory pay. And for this reason, once we get to the end of the tax month, we will need to do a further submission to report the amounts that are being reclaimed. So currently it's saying my total liability is just over £5,000, which I will submit as part of my FPS. But then at the end of the month, when I do my P32 report, I'm just going to run it from the payroll links. You'll see that that's not actually the amount I'm going to pay. I'm paying a lower amount. And the reason for that is that I've reclaimed these statutory payments plus the small employers relief. So that's how we get the money back. We're reducing our payment to HMRC accordingly. So it's this amount we're paying, not the £5,000 that was submitted in our FPS. And for that reason, we do need to do an EPS submission. Now this is a monthly submission. If you pay your employees weekly, you would wait until the end of the month to do this, and you would report what you've claimed for that full tax month. But we're going to do it now because we're running a monthly payroll and we've completed that. And you'll see there is another link for employer payment summary, but you'll find the same option on your e-submissions tasks, just in the tasks list at the top. So first thing it does is it asks you to confirm the reason you're submitting an EPS. And the reason we choose is we're adjusting the payment as I can recover statutory pay. It'll then confirm the tax month that the submission relates to, and it'll then show you the amounts recovered for the tax year to date. So currently, because this is the first reclaim I've made this tax year, it's only showing the month figures. But when I do this at the end of next month, it's going to display the cumulative totals, because that's the way that an EPS submission works. So I click onto next. This is the section where you enter CIS deductions suffered, if that applies to you, if you're a limited company in the CIS scheme. Apprenticeship levy, if it's due, if you're a larger payroll. And then when you complete the wizard, you can ignore that warning. That's just because I'm in a trading room. We can then submit our EPS. And then that information is used to adjust the amount we're going to pay. So we're not going to pay the full £5,000. We're going to pay what was due after we've recovered that statutory pay. So that's the reclaim. That's the small employers relief setting. And you've just seen that you'd run your P32 at the end of the month, and you would submit an EPS. So you can report the values that are being reclaimed. And quick note there at the bottom, the deadline for the EPS is the 19th of the following month, kind of aligns to the payment deadline if you pay manually. And you should wait until at least the 20th of the current month before you send it. And that way the reduction is applied to the correct tax period. So that's setting up and reclaiming the statutory payments. But as an extra bonus, we've got a few troubleshooting tips. So I've pulled together some of the more common problems that people run into around statutory parental pay. We've got some top tips to help you avoid those problems, or if you do come across them, to solve them. Remember as well, if you have got questions, you can continue to submit those through. We will be sticking around at the end as well to give you that extra time should you need it. So the first thing I'm going to cover in the troubleshooting is a scenario where an employee has received SMP or SPP in the past. So if they've had SMP or SPP before, your software in the year-to-date values will always keep a record of the number of weeks paid. And that's because, particularly with maternity pay, it can span tax years. So even though the year-to-date value is cleared down, it needs to keep track of how many weeks have been paid and how much is due to be paid by the end of the leave. Now that causes a problem if you are trying to process SMP for another employee, sorry, for a second child or a third child or a fourth child, because that value isn't cleared down. So there's two ways you can resolve it. I'm going to go through both in a demo. So let me show you how this scenario can crop up. I'm just going to put my date forward to next month. And I'm going to pick a different employee where I'm going to set up some maternity pay. But rather than go through the recording maternity link, I've decided I'd rather go into the employee record and enter the details directly. So the first thing that should raise the alarm is that there are already some dates entered, and these actually relate to a previous child back in 2017. But you might think I can just overtype those dates. I can put the new due date in. We can fill in the born on date when we know it. We can say when they're going to start this maternity leave and when they're due to return to work. And we can even recalculate the average earnings if we need to and tick the box. So you might think that that would be enough to calculate the SMP the next time it's due. But if I go into the enter payment screen now for the next month and take a look at statutory maternity pay, we'll see that there's nothing calculating. And if I'm investigating further, if I click on this drop down, I can see I've got some dates entered, I've got the average earnings, I've got the medical evidence. But when I click on the entitlement tab, we can see that it's still sitting at 39 weeks previously paid. So this is when it's due to start, but nothing's being paid as the system assumes that all 39 weeks have been paid. But of course, that was for a previous child. So we need to resolve this in one of two ways. So one way you could do it is you can go to the employee record, go to the employment tab and into the year-to-date values. From the year-to-date values, you can go into statutory payments and you can actually change the weeks paid manually back to 0. And if you've had to call through to our tech team about this in the past, they might well have taken you through that very process. So that's one way to solve it. Another way to solve it, and also a way to avoid the problem in the first place, is to use that recording maternity screen. So if there are some weeks paid in the year-to-date values, when you click recording maternity, you'll get this alert. So it says you've already paid it to this employee. Do you want to record details for a second child? Now, be careful with this message. If it's someone that is currently receiving SMP and you just want to go in and check the details, you need to be clicking no, because you just want to view the current SMP details. And if I did that before I changed all the dates, it would have shown me those 2017 dates. But if you're sure that you're setting it up for a new child, you can click onto yes, and that actually clears everything out. And then if I put the very same dates in that I entered earlier, and click onto save, we'll see that that has resolved the problem. If I go into enter payments, we've now got our statutory maternity pay due. And within the year to dates, it has automatically sort of cleared down the week's paid value. So if nothing's being paid, could be that they've had it before. And that's two ways that you can resolve that problem. Just to go through some other reasons why SMP or SPP might not be calculating. We've covered the first one, so it hasn't been paid from a previous child. You could use the quick option, recording maternity, recording paternity, to view, to see if there's some old information there, or click yes to clear it. A second reason might be that the average earnings are too low. So in that quick SMP screen, you can check the average earnings. If you do need to manually amend them for any reason, maybe you've only started using the program recently and it hasn't got the history to check on, you can do that. And a third reason for nothing calculating is there is a manual statutory pay calculations box selected, which can be cleared in the employee record. One other common one, particularly in relation to SPP, is that there is only 1 week being calculated where you're expecting to see 2 weeks. And a very common cause of this problem is that there are less than 14 days between the start of paternity pay period and the return to work date. So the advice here is to double check the dates entered. And remember, last day of work is a day they're at work. So SPP starts the following day. Obviously, return to work date is also a day at work. So I've got a scenario set up here that I can quickly run through. So employee 9, if I go into recording paternity, you can see I've entered some dates, and at first glance, last day of work, 1st of December, return to work, 15th of December. Seems like there should be 14 days between those dates, but we've only got 1 week calculated. But the problem is, last day of work was the 1st, so first day of paternity is the 2nd. Returning to work is the 15th, so you're saying they come back on the 14th, so that isn't 2 complete weeks. So either one of these dates might have been entered incorrectly. Maybe the last day of work actually was the Wednesday. Baby was born on the Thursday, and as soon as we have got 14 clear days between these dates, we then have our 2 weeks of SPP calculating. So for that one, just double check the dates. You might need to adjust last day of work or return to work date accordingly. And that there is 10 minutes of troubleshooting. That's the end of the presentation. We are going to stick around for the remaining 5 minutes or so, just to continue answer any questions that you might have. And I also want to run through some of the further support that you might find useful in relation to all things payroll. So first thing I'll mention is our help centre, available at sage.co.uk/help, or from the help centre option directly within Sage Payroll. From here, there's a box where you can search our knowledge base. If you enter a keyword, you'll find the appropriate articles. You can find our support guides that have been created around specific topics. There is a webinars option, which is located towards the top of the help centre. I'll just try and point it out with my mouse here. Webinars up here. This is where you can see what else is coming up, and you can also access our recordings from there. There's videos dotted around the help centre, and the best ways to get in touch, depending on your type of query, can be found there also. But not only that, we have Sage University at sageu.com, where you can hone your payroll skills. You can complete our e-learning courses at your own pace. You can even do the certification, pass your exam and get the official Sage certificate for your software. Plenty of bite-sized learning as well on various topics, making it easy to dip in and out of that learning content. So you'll find it all at sageu.com. That's completely free to access as part of your Sage membership. And that is about it for the presentation, but as promised, I am going to stick around, give Johnny a hand answering any remaining questions. So do send them through if you have any, and if you want a copy of our handouts, they can still be downloaded from that piece of paper icon on the right hand side of the screen. So I'm just going to go on to mute for a few moments while we look at any of those questions that have come through, but I'll come back to say goodbye when we are ready to close down. So I'll speak to you soon. Okay, so thank you so much for those questions that you sent through. We seem to have a bit of a flurry of questions towards the end there. So I think you must have all been concentrating on the webinar during the event. Looks like we've got most of the answers out for you as well, but remember you do have access to our help center, so do check that out, and we will try to add some of these Q&As onto our Sage City forum. So we will provide a link to that in your follow-up email. As we are pretty much out of time, I think we are going to start to wrap things up. So big thank you to Johnny for answering some of those questions for us. And thank you all for joining us at the webinar today. I hope you've found it useful. If you get a chance to complete our feedback survey, that should pop up as you end the webinar. So we really do appreciate any feedback that you may have. Helps us to improve these sessions moving forward. But with that said, we're going to close things down now. So thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great weekend, and maybe I'll see you at some other webinars soon. Goodbye for now.